When Pope Leo XIV stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica for the first time, few could have predicted the tidal wave of reform, confrontation, and moral reckoning that would follow. But now the world watches, some with awe, others with dread, as the new pontiff makes bold, unrelenting moves that are shaking not just the pillars of the Church, but the very structures of global power. Today, we pull back the veil on Pope Leo XIV's latest actions, the choices and decrees that are sending shivers down the spines of powerful leaders, elite institutions, and even certain corners of the Catholic hierarchy itself. Because what's happening right now is nothing short of revolutionary. Let's begin with what many are calling the Reset speech. Just days ago, in a private but soon leaked audience with diplomats from G7 nations, Pope Leo XIV issued a thunderous challenge that the world powers had lost their moral compass. He didn't hold back. In a voice steadied by calm conviction, he accused modern governments of bowing not to God, but to greed, war, and profit. And he named names. He referenced rising military budgets while millions remain without food. He called out multinational corporations that fund wars, pollute sacred lands, and bribe politicians behind closed doors. But here's the part that made people tremble. He said that the Church will no longer remain silent in the face of these spiritual crimes. That under his papacy, the Vatican will no longer act as a moral bystander. The message was clear. Pope Leo XIV sees himself not just as a spiritual guide, but as a moral revolutionary. Now let's talk about his reforms inside the Church itself. While the outside world reacts to his geopolitical confrontations, insiders are grappling with an equally earth-shaking movement: the Pope's war against corruption in the clergy. Just this week, 3 high-ranking officials were quietly removed from their posts. The Vatican did not issue its usual vague statement of health concerns or personal reasons. No. This time, the Pope released a detailed letter, stating explicitly that these individuals were complicit in financial misconduct and cover-ups of abuse. For decades, scandals within the Church have been swept under centuries-old rugs. But Pope Leo XIV is not playing that game. He has ordered a forensic audit of the Vatican Bank, the first of its kind to be made public. And the results? Already, whistleblowers are beginning to step forward. One former Vatican accountant, speaking anonymously to Italian media, said, "This Pope scares them. He is not afraid of the truth. That's why some bishops are whispering behind closed doors." But the most controversial move so far came just 3 days ago, when Pope Leo XIV announced the Declaration on Weaponized Faith. In it, he condemned all religious leaders, including Catholic clergy, who preach division, nationalism, or hatred under the guise of righteousness. He said, "To use the gospel as a sword to cut down your neighbor is to turn Christ into Caesar." This line alone sparked chaos on social media. Some praised him for courage. Others called it a betrayal. But there's no doubt, his stance is reverberating in places no one expected, from war rooms to campaign rallies, from synagogues to mosques. Because what he's doing isn't just theological, it's ideological. One theologian from Georgetown University put it this way: Pope Leo XIV is attempting to strip Christianity of political armor and restore its spiritual core. In doing so, he threatens those who rely on weaponizing religion for power. Which brings us to one of the most chilling developments so far, the so-called Midnight Confession Order. Effective immediately, the Pope has mandated that all clergy offering confession in major cities, from New York to Rome to Rio, must record anonymously, with Vatican encryption, the number of confessions involving violence, abuse, or hatred. Not names. Not identities. But numbers. Why? So the Church can track spiritual health, city by city. This is part of what the Pope is calling the Conscience Index. Critics say it's a data grab. Supporters say it's accountability at last. But regardless of where you stand, one thing is certain: Pope Leo XIV is building a blueprint for measuring the soul of humanity, in ways we've never seen before. But here's where things take an even darker turn. Behind closed doors, reports are emerging that the Pope has received veiled threats. Letters, emails, even anonymous warnings left inside the Vatican's private chapel. One Vatican security expert, speaking to the press under condition of anonymity, said, "We are dealing with forces that do not want the Church to change. And those forces, they're global." And what does the Pope do in response? He doesn't hide. He goes public. He increases his visibility. He walks the streets of Rome at night with only minimal guards, praying silently among the homeless, visiting those abandoned by society. One night last week, he washed the feet of refugees outside a shelter, while reporters scrambled to catch up with his unannounced visit. This is not just symbolic. This is dangerous. Because Pope Leo XIV is telling the world, through action, that he is not afraid. And that's what terrifies people most, not just his ideas, but the fact that he truly lives them. Now, let's talk about his global strategy. In just the past month, Pope Leo XIV has personally reached out to leaders of every Abrahamic religion, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, with one bold request: a historic summit in Jerusalem. He wants to bring them all to the table, not to debate doctrine, but to address the moral crisis of the modern world. Poverty, violence, greed, climate destruction. And he says this summit will not be televised. No cameras. No press. Just real dialogue, and a final joint declaration, if they can agree. Already, religious leaders from Palestine and Israel have expressed cautious interest. And the world watches. Because if this happens, if Pope Leo XIV pulls this off, it will be the first time in history that the three major Abrahamic faiths formally meet not as competitors, but as collaborators for global ethics. So, what's next? According to insiders, the Pope is preparing a series of letters to the youth of every continent. He's commissioning artists, musicians, and poets to help deliver a new message, that the future of the Church will not be chained to the past, but will rise with the next generation. This campaign, tentatively titled The Shepherd's Call, will include short films, digital art, and even AI-assisted reflections to reach young people where they are, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and beyond. Is this tradition? No. It's transformation. But perhaps the boldest action so far is what many are calling the Covenant of the Poor. Pope Leo XIV has ordered that 30% of the Vatican's annual income be redirected toward housing the homeless and healing the hungry across the globe. Already, 2 Vatican properties in Paris and Nairobi are being converted into permanent shelters. One Vatican cardinal allegedly opposed the move, saying it would strain diplomatic ties with donors. The Pope reportedly answered, "If the donation comes with a leash, it is not a gift. It is a trap." Powerful words. And even more powerful actions. But it's not just leaders, elites, or politicians who feel shaken by Pope Leo XIV's latest moves. It's anyone, anywhere, who profits from injustice, from exploitation, from silence. Because this Pope doesn't speak like a bureaucrat. He speaks like a prophet. And prophets are dangerous to the comfortable. This is just the beginning. We'll explore the fiery reaction from global media, leaked letters between bishops, and why even world governments are reassessing how to deal with this unapologetically bold pontiff. Because make no mistake, Pope Leo XIV isn't waiting for approval. He's moving forward. And with every step, the world trembles. Pope Leo XIV's footsteps are being tracked in every capital, whispered about in corporate boardrooms, and, perhaps most interestingly, debated behind closed cathedral doors. His latest moves haven't just stirred the waters, they've created a storm that's forcing everyone, from presidents to priests, to take a side. And now, the backlash is rising. Let's begin with the media response, because within hours of his Declaration on Weaponized Faith. Global media outlets exploded with commentary. Conservative outlets labeled him a radical dressed in white. One commentator on American television went so far as to say, "This Pope is more political activist than spiritual father." Meanwhile, progressive platforms hailed him as a modern-day Martin Luther, calling his acts a necessary cleansing fire in an age of moral decay. But here's the thing, Pope Leo XIV didn't flinch. When a journalist pressed him during an impromptu visit to the Vatican press wing, asking if he regretted the political firestorm, the Pope simply said, "If truth shakes the earth, then perhaps the foundation was false." That quote alone became a global headline within minutes. And it didn't stop there. 2 days after that, a private letter leaked online, an internal memo between bishops in the United States. In it, several expressed deep concern over the Pope's growing influence. The language was cautious, but one sentence stood out in stark black ink. "He is moving too quickly, too recklessly. The faithful are confused. Some are afraid." And yet others, even within that letter, expressed awe. One bishop wrote, "For the first time in decades, our pews are filled with young people asking questions, hungry for something real." Because that's the paradox of Pope Leo XIV. He terrifies and inspires in equal measure. But let's move beyond the reactions. Let's talk about what's happening beneath the surface. Insider sources within the Roman Curia have confirmed that Pope Leo is reorganizing several congregations, Vatican departments that govern doctrine, education, and discipline. And he's placing unlikely figures in key roles. A former social worker from Buenos Aires is now heading the Vatican's Human Dignity Office. An ex-imam turned Catholic theologian from Senegal has been invited to advise the Secretariat for Interreligious Dialogue. And a once excommunicated nun, famous for defying hierarchical abuse, is reportedly being considered for the Pontifical Commission on Canon Law Reform. If these appointments go through, they'll signal something never before seen in Vatican history, a redistribution of power away from the elite clerical class and toward voices of the marginalized. And that is precisely why people are trembling. Because Pope Leo XIV isn't just making spiritual statements, he's tearing down centuries-old walls. In fact, he recently addressed the College of Cardinals and said, "The Church must no longer be a gated fortress, but a bridge with no toll." That line caused a visible stir in the room. One Italian journalist present described the atmosphere as electric and uneasy. It's clear, some cardinals see his words as poetic, others as perilous. And it's not just within the Church. Governments are starting to feel the heat. Just last week, a leaked diplomatic cable from a European intelligence agency described the Pope as a wild card with increasing geopolitical influence. The memo expressed concern that his moral authority could disrupt alliances, incite social movements, or trigger global scrutiny on Western leadership structures. Think about that. A pope described as a wild card by government analysts. What has he done to earn such a label? Let's take a closer look. In a move no one saw coming, Pope Leo XIV has begun backing a new global initiative, the Jubilee Pact. Inspired by ancient biblical traditions, this initiative calls for debt forgiveness for the poorest nations by the wealthiest ones. He's not just making theological noise. He's mobilizing economists, lawyers, and even blockchain experts to explore how ethical ledgers and smart contracts could facilitate real, irreversible debt cancellation. The Vatican has hosted 3 secret meetings in the last month with representatives from countries like Ghana, Bolivia, and Laos. When asked by a skeptical ambassador if the Church was entering the world of tech-driven finance, the Pope reportedly smiled and replied, "If Caesar's coin can enslave, it can also be sanctified." He's not afraid to use the tools of the modern world to build a new spiritual economy. And this vision is spreading. Already, a grassroots movement called the Leo Accord is gaining traction online. It includes young Catholics, human rights activists, tech innovators, and social entrepreneurs. Their slogan? Make mercy global. They're organizing flash prayer mobs, digital fasts, and open forums on topics once considered too taboo for the church: racism, colonialism, ecological repentance. And Pope Leo XIV is encouraging it all. He recently sent them a direct video message saying, "I will not be your gatekeeper. I will be your witness. Let truth move through you like fire through dry fields." It was only 90 seconds long, but it went viral in hours, reaching 30 million views across platforms. This is not a pope that plays safe. He's not waiting for permission. He's writing a new kind of script, for faith, for justice, for the very soul of humanity. But with every bold move, the shadows deepen. A report from an unnamed intelligence source warned that extremist groups, religious and political alike, are growing agitated. Some feel betrayed. Others feel threatened. There are even rumors of plots to discredit him using false scandals, deep fakes, and forged theological decrees. The Vatican has quietly beefed up cybersecurity. But Pope Leo? He remains unfazed. He reportedly told his aides, "If they fear the truth, they will try to silence the voice. But they cannot silence the wind." And this brings us to a deeply spiritual, but highly controversial, decision. Pope Leo XIV has authorized the reopening of one of the most secretive libraries in church history, the Sanctum Archive. Long kept hidden due to its dangerous theological and political content, this archive includes documents from suppressed councils, uncanonized mystics, and letters between early popes and secular rulers. Scholars have begged for access to these materials for decades. Now, under tight surveillance and ethical guidelines, the first wave of documents will be released to a public, digital archive, available for all. One Vatican historian said this move will shake the pillars of religious academia and open long-buried wounds. And why is he doing this now? Pope Leo answered that in his Corpus Christi homily last week. "Truth does not tremble in the light. Only lies do." These words have become a rallying cry. And in confessionals around the world, priests are reporting something astonishing: confessions are increasing. Not just out of guilt, but out of longing. People are returning to the church not to be scolded, but to be seen. They're asking questions, seeking purpose, reclaiming a voice. Because that's what Pope Leo XIV is doing. He's not trying to make people feel safe in their sin or proud in their piety. He's inviting them to rise into justice, rise into mercy, rise into truth. And for the powerful? That's terrifying. Because when the church stops being a museum of silence and becomes a movement of righteousness, it becomes unpredictable. And the unpredictable cannot be controlled. So what's next? Insiders say the Pope is preparing his next encyclical, and it's not about doctrine. It's about legacy. Titled, "The Dust Shall Testify." It will be a reflection on how history judges not words, but actions. It will challenge the Church to be remembered not by its wealth, but by its wounds, its willingness to suffer with the broken. According to one of the theologians assisting him, the document will include reflections on St. Francis, Martin Luther King Jr., and even non-Catholic mystics who spoke truth to power. One draft line reads, "We were not called to be remembered. We were called to remember the forgotten." It is already sending shockwaves through the Vatican. And so, we end this second chapter with a question that may haunt every room of power in the world. What happens when a pope stops playing politics and starts prophesying? Because the moves Pope Leo XIV is making are not just historical, they are holy. And holiness, real holiness, is never tame. Stay with us as we enter part 3 of this unfolding revelation. There, we'll examine the secret letter that could change everything, the silent rebellion growing within certain churches, and the surprising nations stepping forward to publicly align with Pope Leo's mission. The tremors are growing. And the world is watching. We left off with a question: what happens when a pope stops playing politics and starts prophesying? The answer is unfolding before us. And with each new revelation, the tremors become deeper, more widespread. This is no longer just a Vatican story, it's a global spiritual shift, unfolding in real time. Today, in Part 3, we dive into secret letters, silent revolts, and the unexpected international alliances forming behind Pope Leo XIV. Let's start with a letter. Not just any letter, a secret communiqué intercepted and now verified by at least 2 credible sources. It was sent from a high-ranking European prelate to an unnamed bishop in Latin America. The content? A chilling mixture of fear, admiration, and warning. The author begins by describing Pope Leo XIV as uncontrollable and untethered to precedent. But then comes the part that made headlines when it leaked. If we do not align with him, we will be erased by the new tide. If we do, we may lose the privileges we once enjoyed. Either way, the old church is fading. That phrase, the old church is fading, has ignited intense debate within the clergy and laity alike. To some, it's a eulogy. To others, a prophecy. Because make no mistake, Pope Leo XIV is not merely reforming systems, he's unraveling centuries of silent power structures. And it's no longer just priests and bishops who are noticing. In Africa, several prominent churches, previously aligned with ultra-conservative theology, have issued public declarations of support for Leo's moral revival initiatives. One of the most powerful statements came from a cardinal in Nigeria. For too long, our continent has been spiritually colonized by Rome's silence. But this Pope speaks. And when he speaks for us. This is unprecedented. Never in recent history have non-Western churches openly embraced papal authority and moral leadership, while simultaneously resisting it in doctrine. But Pope Leo's global influence isn't about control. It's about courage. And courage is contagious. In Brazil, youth-led Catholic groups have formed what they call favelas of faith, pop-up spiritual communities focused on Leo's 3 pillars: justice, transparency, and mercy. These communities host free clinics, confession circles, and spiritual poetry nights. They don't wait for funding. They move with fire. One young organizer said on camera, "We used to wait for change from the Vatican. Now we realize we are the Vatican." And that's exactly the kind of energy Pope Leo XIV is awakening: grassroots, gospel-fueled, and utterly unpredictable. But while this new wave rises, resistance grows darker. In certain European dioceses, there are reports of silent boycotts. Priests instructed not to mention Leo's encyclicals. Bishops who omit his name during Massachusetts. Even whispered calls for intervention from retired cardinals aligned with old guard Vatican politics. This Cold War within the Church is not televised. But it is real. An anonymous Jesuit scholar referred to it as the Second Council without walls. Unlike Vatican II, he said, this revolution isn't taking place in chambers. It's happening in the streets, in the screens, in the suffering. It's a spiritual uprising, and Leo is just a match. And now, we come to one of the most shocking developments to date. An international summit is being quietly organized, not by governments or religious institutions, but by a coalition of Nobel Peace Laureates, ecumenical leaders, and human rights activists. Their goal? To draft a new document, a global spiritual charter for the 21st century. And Pope Leo XIV has already signaled his support. The working title? The Manifesto of Mercy. Its purpose? To define the non-negotiables of human dignity across all faiths and cultures. Things like the right to shelter, clean water, refuge from war, and spiritual belonging. If completed, this document would be the first of its kind, endorsed not by nation-states, but by moral leaders. A kind of spiritual Geneva Convention. One insider working on the project said, "Pope Leo isn't just trying to fix the church. He's trying to help the soul of the world remember itself. And that might be the most dangerous move of all, because when the soul remembers, it disrupts everything built on forgetting." Meanwhile, global leaders are scrambling to respond. The U.S. State Department released a neutral-tone memo acknowledging Pope Leo's rising, soft power, but warning that religious influence on economic models could pose unforeseen risks. And yet, some leaders are beginning to engage. In a surprise move, the Prime Minister of Canada issued a statement praising Pope Leo's Jubilee Pact initiative, saying it forces us to examine the moral architecture behind our economies. Even a Southeast Asian finance minister, who is not Catholic, declared, "If this Pope challenges how the rich lend and how the poor suffer, he has my attention." This is the new power map, where spiritual conviction begins to rival military or financial influence. But back inside the Vatican, things are shifting too. The Pope's inner circle, known informally as the Shepherd's Council, is growing more diverse by the day. Included now are a former child refugee from Syria turned Catholic seminarian, a theologian who spent 10 years in a Buddhist monastery, a Franciscan nun who ran underground food banks during Latin American dictatorships. This is not politics. It is deliberate, disruptive inclusivity. And the Pope is doubling down. During a recent evening address at the Vatican Gardens, he said, "If the body of Christ has many members, then why does its leadership look like a single face, a single nation, a single voice? Let us become again a body of many hands and hearts." Those words were not just poetic, they were confrontational. And many did not like them. Within hours, a fringe group calling themselves Defenders of the Throne published a manifesto accusing the Pope of heresy, globalism, and diluting Catholic identity. They claimed he was paving the way for a false unity. But the Pope responded not with a press conference. He responded with a visit. The next morning, he visited a remote Italian village where the group was known to have influence. He met with the local clergy. He prayed silently in a cold chapel. Then, outside in the rain, he told the gathered crowd, "I am not here to win arguments. I am here to listen to the aching heart of the Church, even when it beats in anger." The moment went viral. Because once again, Pope Leo XIV showed that he does not run from fire. He walks into it. And now, perhaps most astonishing of all, there is a growing rumor that he is preparing to renounce certain papal titles. You heard that right. Insiders have leaked drafts of a possible declaration in which Pope Leo would formally abandon the historic title, Supreme Pontiff of the Universal Church, claiming it has more to do with Caesar than Christ. If he goes through with this, it would be the first time in modern papal history that a pope voluntarily surrenders a symbolic mantle of absolute authority. One theologian called it the beginning of the end of religious monarchy. Another simply said, "It's martyrdom in plain sight." Because the truth is, power is addicting. And when someone in the highest seat of spiritual power starts letting go, starts giving it away, the whole world begins to panic. Because suddenly, they're forced to confront a question most would rather avoid. What if leadership is not about control, but about surrender? So here we are. The stage is set for something no one can predict. There are whispers of a universal fast, a worldwide day of sacred silence, a multi-religious, multinational pilgrimage to the Vatican by foot called the Walk of Witness. Millions are preparing. Millions more are watching. And still, Pope Leo XIV walks without fear. With every step, every sermon, every act of radical humility, he is daring the world to believe again. Not in him, but in something higher. In truth that costs something. In mercy that disrupts. In love that trembles empires. Because the latest moves of Pope Leo XIV aren't just reshaping the Church. They are daring to reshape the future of faith itself. And in Part 4, we'll take you to the breaking point. We'll look at what's coming next, from the Pope's rumored trip to North Korea, to the secret midnight mass that reportedly healed a dying diplomat, to the explosive internal dossier simply titled The Reckoning. This story isn't just continuing, it's erupting. Multiple credible sources have confirmed that Pope Leo XIV is preparing to visit one of the most closed-off, authoritarian nations on earth, North Korea. You heard that right. The Vatican has not officially announced the visit. No press release. No schedule. But intelligence insiders, human rights advocates, and even 2 South Korean bishops have confirmed that talks are ongoing. And here's the bombshell. Pope Leo has demanded that the visit include 3 things: a joint interfaith prayer at the demilitarized zone, a personal meeting with Christian prisoners of conscience, a live global broadcast of a mass from the outskirts of Pyongyang, translated into Korean in real time. If this visit happens, if this Pope sets foot in North Korea, it will mark the single most daring diplomatic and spiritual act of the century. No pontiff has ever even come close. And yet, with Leo, it feels inevitable. One senior Vatican envoy reportedly told colleagues, "He doesn't believe in avoiding danger. He believes in dragging light into it." And that same week, a second, more mysterious development made headlines. It involves what insiders are calling the Reckoning Dossier. The document, thousands of pages long, is said to be an exhaustive internal review of the Church's darkest history: abuse cover-ups, financial corruption, coercive alliances, and spiritual manipulation. But here's the shocking part. It's not being sealed. Pope Leo XIV has ordered the entire dossier to be redacted for safety and published online by year's end, with full translations into multiple languages. A Jesuit canon lawyer familiar with the project said, "This is not about shame. It's about exorcism. The Church must confront her demons in daylight if she ever hopes to heal." That phrase, exorcism in daylight, is now trending worldwide. And people are asking, why now? Why would a pope choose to reveal the Church's sins in such detail, knowing the firestorm it will bring? The answer came quietly. It wasn't in a press conference, but in a personal letter the Pope sent to a group of survivors in Ireland. One survivor shared this excerpt. "I do not believe healing comes from silence. I believe it comes from naming the wound, washing it, and leaving it uncovered in the light of God. This is not damage control. This is divine reckoning." And while the world holds its breath, another act, smaller in spectacle, but no less seismic, has quietly begun. Pope Leo XIV has reportedly begun midnight visits to the sick and dying. Once or twice a week, without cameras or fanfare, he is driven in an unmarked vehicle to hospitals around Rome, where he prays with terminal patients, often those without family or friends. One nurse who witnessed it said, "He comes in silence. He holds their hand. He doesn't bless like a pope. He cries like a son." And yet something strange, almost miraculous, has begun to happen. In at least 2 separate instances, patients previously declared close to death have shown sudden, inexplicable improvement within hours of his visit. Doctors remain cautious. The Church remains silent. But the whispers are spreading. Is it faith? Is it grace? Is it coincidence? All we know is this: Pope Leo XIV is not waiting for miracles. He is becoming one in motion. And this brings us to the final, astonishing element of our story: what he's building. Because behind the scenes, a structure is being prepared, not a cathedral, but something far more radical. It's called the Pilgrim House. To be built on Vatican soil, the Pilgrim House will serve as a permanent spiritual residence, not for diplomats, cardinals, or dignitaries, but for the rejected. Former sex workers, ex-convicts, abused refugees, apostates, addicts, the forgotten. The Pope has ordered that this building be constructed using stone from demolished prisons and churches destroyed by war. It will have no gold, no marble, no air conditioning. Only beds, bread, scripture, and prayer. A sanctuary for the scarred. An altar for the overlooked. One cardinal reportedly objected to the location, saying, "It's too close to the Apostolic Palace." Pope Leo responded, "And yet Christ came too close for comfort too." This is not symbolism. This is a sledgehammer to the ivory towers of privilege. And those towers? They're cracking. In the past 48 hours, 3 major donors to the Vatican have suspended contributions, publicly citing concern over direction. One statement accused the Pope of trading prestige for populism. But Leo knew this would come. In his most recent homily, he said, "If gold leaves us, but grace enters, we have not lost. We have been purified." These are not the words of a careful statesman. These are the words of a man ready to lose everything, except truth. And the people feel it. Crowds at St. Peter's Square have doubled. Confession lines are longer than ever. A record number of atheists and agnostics are reportedly inquiring about spiritual retreats hosted by the Vatican. Because somehow, someway, in a world drowning in cynicism, people are watching a 77-year-old man in white robes defy kings, comfort beggars, and declare war, not on enemies, but on indifference. And perhaps that is the greatest threat of all. Not that Pope Leo XIV is powerful, but that he is believable. So what do we make of all this? Are we witnessing the rise of a radical spiritual leader? A papal prophet? Or something even more disruptive, a pope who believes? Because belief, in this time of distraction, is the most dangerous thing of all. Belief pierces apathy. It exposes falsehood. It ignites revolutions. And Pope Leo XIV is fanning that flame across the earth. Whether you're Catholic or not, whether you believe or not, this moment is one of the most significant spiritual awakenings of our time. A man with no weapons, no armies, no wealth, is shaking the world. Because he's leading with the one thing most leaders have forgotten: integrity. And so, we close this final part of our journey not with analysis, but with an invitation. Watch him. Not as a critic. Not as a fan. But as a witness. Because Pope Leo XIV is not asking for admiration. He's calling for action. And the trembling? It's not just fear. It's conscience, waking up. The Church is not a building. It is a heartbeat. And the heartbeat is returning. Pope Leo XIV.